We want to start off our first panel with a group of people that represent some of the finest technology known today. We've called this panel In the Beginning. And in the beginning, as you all know, is part of the very first chapter of the Torah that says, Bereshit bara the VC et ha'chevra ha'technologi ve'avie et ze le'olam hagadol. So because of that, we wanted to bring these fantastic technologists and funders up onto the panel. And please join us. We have their topic, as you can read about on page 6 of our Seder of the day, is called In the Beginning, From Startup to Exit, all in 6 days. Now we know that startups don't take 6 days, but we know that that's what we strive to accomplish, to make the hard work of building a company feel like it's 6 days, and then have tremendously wonderful exits. On our panel today, we have Randy Ditzler, who is the partner for the Sequoia Israel, to join us today with 3 excellent companies that are heavily involved, or have heavily involvement from Sequoia. We have Trevor Healy, the CEO of Yaya. Is that correctly?
Jaja.
Jaja. It depends upon your phonetic reading of the character set, where we will... Trevor is, of course, from what I call the I countries. We have Israel, India, and Ireland, who bring us tremendous technology. So Trevor, you'll hear in his accent that he's from an I country. We have another I country, Yoav Izhar Prato, who's the founder and CEO of Kensho, who's going to tell us how they're taking over what we think is currently the biggest aggregator. Kensho really is. Pay attention today. And then we have Yoram Novik, the founder of Topio, that had a fantastic exit when it was acquired by Network Appliance. Thank you very much, gentlemen, for being here. We want to learn all about you. Randy, may I turn it over to you?
So first off, you'll notice we left off the 6 days part. We haven't managed to do an exit in 6 days, but we'll keep trying. So we'll get later to the stories of Jaja, Kensho, and Topio. I'll start with a little background on us, what we're doing in Israel, and kind of early days for us. So back in 1972, when Don Valentine started Sequoia, we had one office for almost 27 years. But it was the mid to late 90s when he realized that the rest of the world was going to catch up. So they began to look for another place to plant a flag. And while they looked in Austin, Boston, even Europe, and we have offices in China and India today, it all started back in Israel in 1999 with the first office outside of California. And I think people asked us, are you guys crazy? Do you know what's going on in Israel? And I think everybody in this room is probably familiar with the reasons why. And I think a decade later, we're very happy to be in Israel, have a deep commitment, and continue today with 4 funds, more than 40 companies, over 10 exits, 30 active companies, and we can say confidently world leaders in a number of categories with a few of today's companies and others that aren't shown. So, what do? We invest up and down the IT stack across all verticals and sectors. Long list of boring stuff, but it keeps us busy. And the things that we're looking for, if you're an entrepreneur in this room, are pretty self-explanatory. And we've been fortunate to be investors in companies on the right side of the ledger here, and hopefully these on the esteemed panel today that had these elements. And this is something that we hold near and dear and focus on daily. Don't forget it. And as an entrepreneur, I think you'll hear from the stories from the field, these values and attributes come through loud and clear. So with that, hopefully the commercial is concluded, and we can begin with some entertainment, beginning with Solo Mio from Trevor Healy at Jaja.
Thank you, Randy. So thanks very much for the invite today. As was mentioned, I do come from an I country, Ireland, and Yoram commented earlier on while we were waiting outside that he was in a hospital in the UK one time, and he was talking to the guy in the bed next to him, and the guy commented that all his great employees were from I countries, either Ireland or Israel. So the Israeli team looked long and hard for an Irish CEO, and they found one, which meant that I got the job. Jaja is playing in the world of telecommunications, and the communications market is rapidly changing today. It once was the case that if you think about the feature set on the communications network, we had only two great innovations, or three maybe, move to mobile, voicemail, and text messaging. And if you think about your daily use of your phone, other than up until about 5 years ago, people only used their handsets for those type of purposes. But today, the communications market is rapidly changing. What we're now seeing is we're seeing over 15% of all international traffic traveling on IP and database networks. We're seeing the IM market. You'll hear a little later from Yossi Vardi, the founder of IM. Over 1 billion people communicating on instant messaging and using that instant messaging platform for their telecommunications also. The cable companies own double-digit percentages of all telecommunications in the home, and the list goes on. So at Jaja, we saw the opportunity to play in this center force of this communications change, because our premise as a company is that if you put yourself in a market that's going through a transition and change, and you build a platform for that market, then great companies are built. There's been great examples, Intel and the 8086 processor, Google and the World Wide Web, General Electric and electricity, AT&T and the original telephony system. So you probably use Jaja today without even knowing it. Some of you might be users on our consumer portal at jaja.com, but that's a very secondary business for us. Our primary business is to provide unified communications to the likes of Yahoo in their instant messaging platform. We enable their users to communicate globally. If you are dating online and you're dating at Match.com, Friend Finder, eHarmony, or one of the other properties, and you want to communicate with your friend or potential date, and you're using voice on those websites, you're probably using Jaja technology. We enable all the major dating portals for people to communicate anonymously. If you're part of a large enterprise like Pfizer or Logitech or some other of the large enterprises that we enable, you'll probably be doing click-to-call on your internal portal, or picking up your digital phone on your desk, or using your IM product and utilizing the Jaja cloud in the back end. If you're part of Comcast and you're using one of their digital phone services, you're probably using Jaja. And if you're using an iPod or an iPhone, you might be using an application that enables you to talk over the Wi-Fi network using Jaja. And the list goes on. So the premise of the company is to put ourselves at the middle of all of these global communications interactions. Voice today, things like voicemail tomorrow, messaging, etc. And when you put yourself in the middle of these interactions, you start becoming a conduit for an industry that's going through massive growth, and your business model can then grow subsequently. So we'd like to thank Sequoia for believing in us. It was a very interesting story, founded by two Austrians in Vienna, then setting up the development center in Israel, hiring an Irish CEO, moving it to Silicon Valley, and recently going profitable. So thanks to Randy Heim and the rest of the team in Tel Aviv.
All in 6 days.
All in 6 days.
Sing for supper.
I'm not that good of a singer. I'll save you the experience. Thank you. I'm not that good as a singer, and I don't talk as good as Trevor. Probably run faster, but not such a good speaker. in terms of English. Well, I'm here to tell you the story of Kensho. Kensho is actually a company which we started '06, something that we sketched on the board. Later on, there was a hell of a ride was ahead. A lot of ups, some downs. There is a story behind each picture, which we can later on discuss. And the issue is really about trying to stretch the limits. Anything that was taken for granted in the industry that we call search engine marketing is something that we believe is untapped. We believe has been misused. We believe there is huge potential ahead. And in a nutshell, what we do, we have this platform that takes a website, we scan it and index it automatically, and then we build a campaign in Google, Yahoo, and MSN in an automatic manner, highly sophisticated, that is therefore optimized all over and kind of generates profits or traffic or whatever the metrics that need to be used for clients all over the world. Clients can be large retailers, news sites, financial sites, as well as agencies of all sorts of kinds, affiliate agencies, branding agencies. And for us in Kensho, it's very important to keep a global perspective. It's a funny thing about the I countries, because whenever you look in the internet, next to Israel is Iran. I always laugh at that. And I think that scene is global, at least in the cyber age. It's something that is truly, truly remarkable. I myself, this is my third startup I'm involved at. One went in flames, one is on fire in a good way, and this one is, at least for now, Kensho is going in the speed of light. Very much according and because or together with the friends from Sequoia. I don't think it's that trivial to have a strong, inspiring financial investor that you may honestly think and see as a partner rather than an owner or someone on the board. And this is the relationship that we enjoy so far. Thank you.
You're up.
Guess it doesn't. Okay, so I'll talk about Topio. So when I was told about this panel, and the title is From Start to Exit in 6 Days, Topio doesn't truly fit this. It took 6 years and not 6 days, but I guess that's as close as we could get. So Topio was founded in 2001, and in terms of the structure of the company, the headquarters and all customer-facing functions, sales, marketing, business development, and support were all done in the US in Santa Clara, California, and the R&D and all the product development was done in Israel, which I think it's a great model, and it's a model that proved very well for Topio, and I believe was one of the reasons that we were successful where many of our competitors were not, by leveraging the benefits and the attractiveness of both sides of the ocean. In terms of the goal, the company goal from the first day was to become the leading company in the space of data replication and recovery, which basically enable large organizations, big companies to maintain their operation and their business even in spite of disasters, whether it's human-made or nature-made. And along the way, we were able to build a product that addressed this market. The interesting thing about this space, it's a multi-billion-dollar space, and it is the fastest growing segment in the storage industry. And while it's a large space, there are many pain points, and a lot of the customers that were using previous technologies had to address those pain points, and they were mainly that all other solutions were proprietary, they were expensive, and we were able to come up with an architecture that was both open, was software only rather than a combination of software and hardware, and at the same time was very scalable, and we could use it even in some of the biggest organizations that are out there in the world. Along the way, in the 6 years, we were able to get to more than 150 enterprise customers. Many of them were among the Fortune 100, so in the age of internet company, 150 may not seem like a large number, but many of those are Fortune 100 companies, and we were able to generate a significant revenue out of each one of those companies. And throughout the life of the company, which was 6 years, we raised $25 million. And the first investor was Sequoia Capital, and they invested throughout all the rounds of investment in the company. We also raised money from Sigma Partners, from Star, and from Intel Capital. The company was acquired by Network Appliance in 2006 for $160 million, and Network Appliance, like many other storage companies, were interested in the company and the technology because it basically enabled them to service their best customers in a way that they couldn't do before, and validated the value proposition and validated the business that Topio basically started in 2001. An interesting aspect here is that, as you can see, the company started in 2001. It was not a great economic climate, and I think it was a great time to start a company then, and I think now it's not the same, but probably a good opportunity for companies that truly address pain points that are out there.
That's it. We started out, I think, to do one thing and found along the time frame, which is 5 years now, that we had to re-innovate. And it's like the hockey analogy. You know, ice hockey is not a big sport in Israel, but it's skating to where the puck is going to be, as opposed to skating where the puck is today. And from our perspective, we had to re-innovate and reinvent our business 3 times now. And what we did, it was pretty brave moves, because we were doing remarkably well at each iteration of the business. And as a management team, we went back to our investors and our board and said, guys, you know, we see an iceberg in this business, and we now need to re-innovate and move to a new level. And we've done that 3 times. Subsequently, the competitors we had in those verticals and markets that we were playing in went out of business. So we were quite fortunate that we saw read the tea leaves correctly. But I would encourage anybody in the audience who is an entrepreneur or in an early stage company, you have to have the fortitude to speak to your investors, speak to your board about reinventing yourself, even if you're doing remarkably well in a particular market, and then also thinking about where the puck is going to be tomorrow, and not to rest on your laurels as to what you're doing today.
And Yoav, you work in a competitive market, zillions of companies, homegrown. How do you differentiate yourself from the crowd, and what happens every day?
Well, Israel is always against the odds. When we started, it was like DoubleClick was sold for $3 billion for Google, which is our main competitor. And then Atlas was sold for $6 billion. They are giants.
Follow the model.
There are some giants, but honestly thinking, when you go into the ring, it's really about the match itself. And when we started using the technology and looking looking in the eyes of things, then we humbly thought that there is a compelling proposition. So we thought that we should go into the market. I do have a confession to make in terms that we had this whiteboard beautifully drawn about the opportunity and the fact that Asia is untapped and the small medium business market is something that these giants are not going for. But then when we went into the first business transaction and we won against DoubleClick and Omniture and these guys, we changed the strategy on the go, and we said, we want to fight. We want to take it to the edge. And since then, I think we are very bad news to these guys, I hope we'll keep on going. I truly respect and admire what Trevor is saying about the fact that you need to think ahead. You need to try and and rise above the weeds and understand where are the trends. And the thing is, you can only do it if you're a leader. So, or it becomes much easier if you're a leader. So we wanted to be in this pack. We want to lead it. For now, we're doing quite good, and hopefully it stays the same.
So Yoram, you've flown above the clouds, fought the battles. What are the lessons learned, and what can you share with Yoav on his journey?
Sure. So I would say that the main lessons that I learned throughout the life of Topio is, the first one is that the only thing that is always out there and is constant is change. And while you cannot plan for change, you have to be prepared for changing a lot of things. And I would say that throughout the entire history of Topio, we changed every aspect of the company, whether it was the business model, the technology, the positioning, and it was a very long journey, but I think that by being dynamic, by understanding and realizing what are the changes, it was easy to be a company that changes over time and changes faster than the other competitor, because the advantage is if you can leverage the change to your end rather than let the competitor leverage the change for his side. So I would say this is the most important lesson. The second one has to do with being a small company and competing against the large guys. It always looks like there are many reasons and the odds are always against you, and you can always find a way to get out and be creative and find a way out of it. And I think persistence pays. And if you are persistent, if the team has a lot of passion for what they do, I think you can overcome a lot of the challenges, and at the end of the day, you can do better and you don't have to give up, even though all the odds are against you, at least when you start. I think those are the two lessons that I would carry away from the Topio experience.
Anything different next time around?
Well, there are a lot of things that I think I would definitely do different next time. I think that the most important thing when you build a company is to have a very, very strong value proposition. And I think that while Topio did have a good value proposition, I think where we could do better is to have a value that is much stronger and could really solve problems that are much bigger than the problem we were attempting to solve. So I would say go after a bigger problem, even though the challenges are larger, is what I would advise everybody else to do, which is if you attack bigger problem, you have larger challenges, but you have larger chances, and you can find a better way to make a better exit.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
I have a question which I'm looking for a simple answer. The answer is just a number. And the question is, how many no's have you heard before you got to yes? And, it's all-inclusive. The only answer I'm not accepting is 42.
Infinity. I would say on the whole business of being in an early stage company is defeating the no, because when you start your business, you tell all your friends, we're going to start this great business, and everybody shakes their head and said he's crazy, but we'll drink his wine and eat the dinner. And then when you go to your investors, they tell, the initial investors will tell you no, and then you refine and you get to a yes, and your first customer tells you no, and your employees tell you no. So I think it's a fundamental part of dealing with it, is refusing to accept the no. There is no no's if you're going to succeed in an early stage business. You have to have that sense of craziness or fortitude. Only certain people have the gene, and it's not. Sometimes it's quite close to madness, but you have to have that, I think.
There's a lot of companies in your space, and I'm trying to understand what was so special about Accenture
Sequoia investing in you? Because, you know, we all are struggling with VCs all around the world, and again, the number of no's, and you know, you actually never get a no. You just get a request for additional information, right? But again, if you can share with us what was special, you know, and what was your approach actually that made you, you know, Sequoia is a well-respected VC that we all want to have on our side. So we are trying to learn. Thank you.
Well, I think it was a combination of three. I think that first it was the approach. We took a different approach. While everybody's trying to do simple things, we came from a different angle trying to do complicated things. And it's mainly to do, it's getting a bit techy, but it's mainly to do with optimizing the quality of an online activity rather than just the bidding or the keywords or whatever parameters that actually generates a truthful winning online activity. And when you try and tackle this kind of issue, a lot of issues are coming around, mainly technological barriers, which, like Yoram said, as we see it, the higher the barrier, then the bigger the opportunity is. So when we came into Sequoia, we kind of had this passion to try and solve this overwhelming, holistic issue. Second, I believe it was about the fact that we are realistic. We're trying to be very loyal to the fact that we need to make sales, we need to have true value, we need to be having something that is very simple. I mean, sophisticated technology at the end of the day translates to simplicity, nothing else. And I think we kind of managed to show that based on the fact that we were running for a year already. And the third is, hopefully, it's the fact that we did manage to get around a group of people that can navigate this ship wherever it goes. This kind of maturity with humiliation and self-confidence and innovation is something that, you know, I can tell you as a CEO, a large part of my job is to try and find the right people. I always say I come to the office and dealing with problems and hiring people. These are my two main issues. I need to get my people to work. And I think Sequoia kind of saw it in the same view. And I can say that we also, we did want Sequoia because we thought Sequoia is #1 for this market. Based on the experience and the statistics. But when we came in and actually started talking, I must say that we found a very humble, high-level approach, which, you know, bought us. And about this no, you know, we founders do not listen to no's. It's not that they are not being said; they are said, but we just don't understand this word. So we just kept on pushing until it was done.
Great. Any other questions? Sure.
There's a difference in the valuation strategies of pre-money companies. Is there a different approach between Israel and the U.S. in terms of valuing emerging ventures?
I don't think we think about it differently. I mean, if you look at a Series A in Israel or the U.S., I think it gets done a little bit at a lower valuation in Israel overall. But I think at the end of the day, if you're looking at early stage investing, there's investors, there's founders, and there's pool, and all three of those things have to balance on the front end if you're going to build a large freestanding company long term. So maybe a little bit lower valuation early, but not significantly.
Hi, I have a quick question for Yoav. Well, some of you mentioned that change is contact. So how do you manage communication with the VC to make sure that they understand that you manage change and they don't think that you are crazy? I think that you get my point. Like many times I hear that VCs, they are looking for a team, and you know sometimes they are also risk averse. But given the situation that you have to manage change, how do you manage the communication to address that point?
I think that the first thing to do is to try to align expectations. And I think that it has to be set clear that as management you understand you have the responsibility of making that happen. And I think once this is done and you are able to stand by the demand, then it kind of puts you in a position to come to the VC and say, I'm running the company, I know what decisions needs to be made, and I can use all the help that I can use. So instead of a kind of, and I'm a bit exaggerating to convey the point, but instead of having dictating like conversations, it becomes truthful brainstorming and thinking. And a lot of it is, actionable targets that needs to be achieved or actions that needs to be delivered. And another amazing thing I found about Sequoia is that they are actually willing to come and join the race. They are taking tasks from any meeting. What do you want? You want introductions, you want follow-ups, and it's kind of that atmosphere that we feel we're all rowing the boat together. And if that, if you can achieve that, I think that's the key. There is a lot of openness, a lot of transparent communication. Nothing is being, as I'm saying to the board, a good board meeting is something that you do not have to prepare to. It's something that is being built over the quarter, and you just come in and okay, stop for a minute and think, rather than get all the company. Okay, now we need to prepare for the board. Personally, I don't believe in it from the experience I had. So for now.
Sure.
I was just curious, do you think any of your companies have you find yourself where you got funded?
Why don't you start, Yoram or Trevor?
Yes,
Yes, he asked in the beginning, how did you fund your companies when you didn't have funding?
Well, in my case, I just funded it myself for some time. I was fortunate to be able to get to Sequoia in Israel, and even though I didn't have a product yet and I didn't have anything more than just the concept, and since, at least in the storage industry, you can't do a prototype that makes a lot of sense in a very small amount of money, they were willing to do a Series A of about $3 million, and the basis for it was few slides, ideas, and concepts. And I would say that the Sequoia value to Topio was their ability, unlike, I talked to, I don't know how many VCs at that time, during 2000, 2001, and everybody was trying to get to the point where you lower the risk by having some validity of the concept, and Sequoia was willing to look at the opportunity, see that this is a huge opportunity, it will take a long time to build it, it will not be truly possible to validate it unless you put the efforts and you put the funding, and they funded the company, and I was lucky enough to get the funding, after funding it a little bit on my own, but that was truly a very small amount. And that's true, I would say, for data center companies. I'm not sure how it works in other industries, so I'll let Trevor and you talk about it.
I mean, I did 3 early stage companies. All the initial funding was done differently, and they all came with different headaches. The first company I funded with friends and family. And I wouldn't advise that, because you have Aunt Joan asking you, how the internet is doing, when you're doing your e-commerce startup. They all made money. It went public, so everybody was happy at the end of the day. But thank God it did go public, because if it didn't, there wouldn't be a family home to go to after a few weeks. The second one I funded myself. I made some money off the public offering, and then I took some of the money and I said to my wife, this time's going to be different. I won't have to deal with John and Jim and all these other idiots. I'm going to do this company myself, and it's going to be a better company. And so I took a ton of money from our bank account, and then every morning you know, I would get up, I lived in an apartment in San Francisco, get to work, and then my wife would go, she was actually working, as she said, and she would give me a list of stuff to do during the day, pick up the laundry, get the groceries, because I officially wasn't working, right? Because we were funding the company, so it was coming out of our savings. That comes with its problems as well, because then you have pressure at home. So I think the best way to fund a company is with angels. That's my advice. Because angels, you know, if you're pre-Sequoia, I'm a Sequoia guy, so I would always say, best VC in the world, Sequoia. You want to go get money, go there first. But if you're pre-Sequoia, find an angel, because angels understand what you're going through. You won't have Aunt Joan on your back. You won't have your wife giving you honeydews every morning and looking at the bank account. You won't feel so much pressure. And also the angel will introduce you to a network of people that will probably get you funded.
One correction, we actually do seeds, so you can come to us as well.
Sorry, Randy.
Yes, sir.
Speaking here? Yeah. I don't know if you heard President Obama's speech today, but clearly he's taking somewhat of a different political direction with respect to the peace process in the Middle East. And I wonder, perhaps it's a little premature, how the business community in Israel looks at the new administration and whether you think it'll be any kind of a change, better, worse, whatever.
Maybe I'll try that one. I guess from our perspective, we don't think it will change much, no matter what party's in power. I think there's much more experience in this room than I. Technology is the #1 export of Israel and will continue to be. And foreign investment continues, and there has been no change through intifadas, through wars. Our portfolio companies, I'll ask, how many days of work have you lost during 2001 till today? I think the answer is 0. So I guess that while administrations change, I think that the innovation and capital support of Israel will continue. Yes, sir. Wait for a mic, please, 1 second.
Good morning. My name is Benjamin Zev, and my question is for you, Randy.
Sure.
At what stage do you like to get involved?
The earlier the better. I mean, I think you heard Yoram say he came with some slides and an idea, and we invested. In that case, it was a Series A. We've done 2 seed deals under 100K this year so far, and we'll continue. So ours is the earlier the better. And we're always open, so feel free to send us a note, and we will give you a clear answer one way or the other, and we won't ask for more information. Send them. Thanks. Yes, sir, back in the... 1 second, we'll get a mic to you.
Sorry about that. Quick question, perhaps not a fair question, but I'm going to ask it anyway. Do you think that, and this is more to the companies, the CEOs there, does it make sense for every company to take venture funding? Because a lot of times you look at a business, people can have a business that can be profitable, it can make the founders a good living, but it's not necessarily going to go public or make hundreds of millions of dollars or that 200 times X that VCs are looking for. And I've had friends of mine who had businesses that in theory were decent businesses, made money, but they didn't have that superstar quality. And they had taken VC funding and ended up, the VCs wanted an exit one way or the other, and it put them in a position where eventually the whole thing folded. So just some feedback on that, maybe.
Yeah, I mean, I have a very strong view on this one, so I'll give a quick answer. I mean, not all money is equal. So I would recommend taking money from VCs, because VCs give you an element of connectivity and a referral network that you can never build up on your own. And then secondly, you may start out with a company that you might think, you know, is only going to be a corner shop, but it might, you know, when you're dealing with a Sequoia or other people who have experience in building the likes of Google, you might make it a supermarket. And I'm a very strong believer in that, so I would always recommend it.
Yes, similarly, I would say this. The question is, what is the goals for the company? If the only goal is to make good living and to have a small company that just is just another company, if you can have a business model and you don't need any funding, that's okay. If your goal is to be the next big company in a large enough industry, yes, you can do it on your own. There are examples, but your chances are way, way better by getting the VCs. And yes, money is probably the primary reason, but VCs also bring with them a lot of value, which is the networking, which is even the credibility. And, as you have said, one of the biggest challenges of CEOs is to recruit talent. And when you need to recruit good executives that are required to make the companies, and you just come as, I'm a company, I've got some money in the bank, it's very different than I got a top-tier VC behind me. They've done all these big companies. You can recruit talent very easily. You can get to a lot of customers and even sell to those customers because the credibility of somebody has already invested and he has done it in the past brings you a lot of value. So the question is, what do you want? If you just want to make a living, you don't need VCs all the time. If you want to make a big company, your chances are way better.
I would add to that another phenomenal aspect is the time to market and the speed that you can go. There is that much that you can do when you grow organic. It's a very healthy growth. It's very realistic, but it does limit you in terms of how innovative from a business perspective and marketing perspective you can be. And when you come to art, you ask yourself, okay, I need some funding, I need some fuel to this jet. There are flavors of money. And when you look at those flavors, then some might think that strategic investment from a strategic partner is the right thing in terms of strategic client, while my personal belief is keep it as generic as possible and try to deal with the generics of the company rather than the marketing aspect. The marketing is something that the company has to choose and has to be able to maneuver around. And so I think when you get a VC, a good VC on board, you do get fueling in terms of inspiration as well as guidance and funding while not losing any market share and being able to run faster.
Okay, we've got a question over here.
A question for Sequoia. If one match to Inferno is possible, why there is a need for round B, and if you can give us examples from your investments.
Yeah, the Inferno from a single match implies capital efficiency, and I think that for all of us and founders included, if you could get to profitability and growth in a Series A, we'd all be fans. The reality is very few companies can actually pull that off, and it will take sometimes B and C and then even mezzanine rounds as you grow. A number of those companies that you saw on the slides up there, Yahoo started with less than $750,000. Another large company had $10 million in the bank, they spent $3 million, and that was Cisco. So it can be done. It's very difficult, but we do enjoy capital efficiency because we think it's good for everybody. The success story is consistent hard work. There's no free ride, there's no 6-day exit. It's every day, day in, day out, and I think you're probably hearing that from these guys as well.
I have a question for Sequoia. My name is Bert Wouters. I'm with BCW Consulting. We are a business consulting company. I have a question for Sequoia and a second question for the CEOs. The question for Sequoia deals with, does it make any difference? We are incidentally first stage early investment looking.
I didn't hear the question, sorry.
First stage early investing. And the question I have is related to grant writing. Does it make any difference when you hear, does it make any difference if you get a proposal in that has already done or attained already a grant, let's say, in the area of energy, a grant obtained from the DOE, for instance, here, does it make any difference in your evaluations? And a question for the CEOs, what did you do, because there are concerns on our part very early on about protection of IP, intellectual property and so forth, as you go to different VCs and so forth, we hear that in general these days VCs don't really accept much of a protection of it, and it opens up a lot of risk on our part to go around to a lot of different places. So these are the two questions I have. One is on grants, the other one is on protection of IP.
So grant may or may not change our opinion. I think if we think about energy and the DOE and the like, our overriding goal is sustainability. And many of these grants can go away overnight, and we can invest a lot of money and have them evaporate on us. So to the extent that we think the grant is helpful in a self-sustaining business long-term, i.e. economic viability, it certainly helps us. If it is simply for a one-time grant that we have to count on 2 years from now, it's probably not going to help us. And I'll let you guys take the second question.
So I think the question was in terms of IP protection, how do you work with VCs without risking the company? And it's a great question, because VCs wouldn't sign an NDA, and you basically have to work with them, and like any relationship, you have to build some trust. And yes, in the due diligence, they will probably want to know everything, including the IP of the company, and you just have to work it out. And it is definitely not a good advice to talk to everybody and to tell everybody what you have. You have to do it in phases, and you don't have to open up in the first phase. You have to start the process. You have to figure out who you want to work with. Once you figure out, and once it seems to be that it's going the right direction, you do have to open up, and you do have to tell more than you probably want to, but that's part of the process. You want to limit it, but you cannot avoid opening up and talking about IP, but it's not in the best interest of any VC to start and violating the IP of companies, because otherwise nobody would go back to them. So, but it's a trust issue, and you have to basically build the trust over time and then get the investment from whoever you trust and open up as part of the process.
I see other hands going up.
I'd like to ask a question about, it takes around 10 hours of the day. When I'm calling Israel at 10 a.m., it's 8 p.m. in Israel. How has that affected your abilities as you, Randy, and our CEOs to work with your teams that are spread out and you have such a large time span to get in touch with them? Practical question.
On the phone all day, all night.
It's easier if you use Jata.
Exactly.
Beautiful.
It's cheap too. 7 cents to Israel.
And,
Sure.
and the other question is, when are you gentlemen putting technology in so that no matter where we are in the air or going through a tunnel, that we can stay connected? We want that solution, and we want it now.
I want to answer that, because that's actually technically very difficult. But what we did was we have a little workaround. So if you're on a conference call, either by us or one of our partners, and you lose the connection, it calls you back 60 seconds later. So if you happen to get out of the tunnel within 60 seconds, your conference call will call you back. And then you won't have to fumble for the 1-800 number and so on.
Yes, sir. Grab a mic. I'm not sure there are minimums. I think we look at every opportunity on its own. Ownership does matter a lot. If we're going to commit to a board, then having a reasonable ownership percentage to cover return on time, if you will. Amounts really vary depending on the kind of company. A semiconductor company will take a lot more money than perhaps an internet company, so it depends on the kind of company, the stage. But generally there aren't minimums, except on ownership we are very mindful of, as all investors and founders are as well.
And remember, please state your name and your company, because as it says in every place you go, Da Lifnei Mia Taomed, so we want to know who you are.
Hi, my name is Stephanie Brecker. I'm a corporate partner at Shepherd Mullen. My question is, to what extent are companies in Israel now continuing to take money from the Office of the Chief Scientist? Several years ago, I did some deals in Israel where we were trying to acquire a few Israeli companies, and this was very difficult because the company I was working for was based in the U.S. and wanted to export the technology into the U.S. so that their R&D teams here could work on it, and that was a big no-no because the companies had that we were looking at had taken OCS money, and I'm wondering how that's being resolved today.
Before you answer, I want to mention that this afternoon, in our media and entertainment section of the day, the former chief scientist of Israel will be here, and that's a great question to put to her. Her name is Orna Berry, because policy that comes out of that office was established by her, and it continues under the hands of Eli Opper. And there's a wealth of knowledge, and Israel has a unique position in establishing the incubator system that the government funds in order to create more technology and innovation from Israel that can reach the world. Were any of your firms part of the Chief Scientist program?
Not my firm, but that was a business decision. It has nothing to do with. We looked at it and we decided not to take the money, but I think there are ways to overcome it, and I think in the other session probably you can ask the question.
I'll answer broadly. About a third of the companies in our portfolio have OCS, and over the last couple of years, the OCS has become much more amenable to changes, acquisitions, and change of control. So it's been a good experience so far.
Hi, Paul Wagner from CreativeLab.tv. Thank you, gentlemen. This is excellent. Randy, I think this might be mostly for you, but everyone, please feel free to chime in. We're developing something in the music space that's very unusual. The question that has been in my mind is, as the social networking world has become more and more saturated, do you tend your, even though you can prove the model for an online destination, if you've got defensible IP and a whole bunch of ways of utilizing that within that destination, do you keep that focus, or do you venture into the licensing world with tools that might be useful elsewhere? Where do you see that going? Thank you.
I'm not sure I'm going to hit this right, but follow your users. If your site is growing and you have a lot more engagement with your users, you're probably onto something. To the extent that it's static and not growing, then maybe a different model might be suggested. But again, without much information, I hope I'm somewhere close. Sure.
We have time for one more question.
John Lertzman, Fulton Street Software. My question is directed at Mitch and the other gentleman. Social responsibility and green companies may be overused or cliche at this point, but do you take into consideration in evaluating a proposal or a business the social aspects, or is it a primary interest or a secondary interest once the business or the idea may be proven? And to the other gentleman, do you consider that when you're making a proposal or looking at a possible new venture that you want to start? Does that come into consideration or become a part of your concern?
So I guess for us, I'd say it's a primary interest, but it has to go quickly to a viable business. And green has to be more than just green. It has to actually deliver benefits and also deliver a valuable investment for our LPs and our teams. So yes, but it still has to be a standalone business.
I think, all great companies change or affect society in a positive way. I think it's very hard to find a very great company and figure out where they haven't. So even Google, Yahoo, Intel, Cisco, Apple, all these companies have affected our lives, Microsoft. So my philosophy has always been to set out to do something that will affect social change or change the world. And I always feel that if you set out on that path, it might be grandiose and a little bit highbrow, but if you set out on that path and you get somewhere along that path, then you'll do great things. And if you do great things, then you'll have a great outcome.
Well, thank you very much. I think on the technology and social lines, we've covered many bases, from how to find things, how to store things, how to communicate things, and how to fund great companies. And I want to thank our panel very much for illuminating us with ideas of how to get a company funded, get it growing, get it revenue positive, and getting it exited so that everyone in the food chain can enjoy. Randy, thank you so kindly.
One final point that I think everyone should take away is that we are absolutely investing. Ignore the papers. It's a great time to start a company. We've done more deals the first half of this year than all of last year already, so it's a great time to start a company. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you. Randy? Awesome. Thank you very much. This is we had a New York Times article written about this conference, which we're very excited about because it took the idea from here even to London. I got a call the next day reading the New York Times article in the Herald Tribune saying, we know about the Israel conference. And this book that I'd like to give to our wonderful panelists is by an author who writes for the New York Times called Jim Flanagan, who was for 20 years on the Forbes desk and for 10 or 15 years writing for LA Times and now writing for the New York Times. And it's a little story about business here in California. His next book will be about business in Israel. So that's when you'll get that next year. And thank you all very kindly. It's been a pleasure.